gang work and corruption in Montreal in the days of Jean Drapeau and Pacifique Plante. So he had no ties to Duplessis. He ordered the trial, the jury were named, and we were acquitted.
Inspected and repaired only last year, the Duplessis Bridge at Three Rivers, Quebec collapsed suddenly in the middle of the night, dropping 3 cars into the icy waters of the Saint-Maurice River. Of the 7 passengers, only 3 were rescued. Premier Duplessis, for whom the bridge was named, says the tragedy was the work of communist saboteurs, while liberal members of legislature spoke of graft in connection with the building of the bridge, claim it was built of cheap materials. An official investigation has been launched.
The investigation revealed that there was shoddy material included in the building of the bridge, and that the contractor, who had been given the contract to build with certainly enough money to do it properly, had added to his profits by putting in some cheap material which shouldn't have gone in there. So it had nothing to do with communists. But during that period after the war, when Duplessis was in power, in the late 1940s into the 50s, the Quebec people who fought for their rights were subjected to a vicious witch hunt, which was just as bad as the McCarthy witch hunt in the United States.
The RCMP actively monitored leftist activities in Quebec as elsewhere. Working with Quebec police, on one occasion they even prevented a local peace group from holding a meeting. But Quebec had a special status in the crusade against communism. Back in the 1930s, Duplessis enacted one of the most anti-democratic laws in Canada's history, the so-called padlock law. The police could raid and padlock any building in Quebec it suspected was used to promote communism. Duplessis freely utilized the act to persecute any left-wing organization or union which had the temerity to oppose him. The act let the police invade people's homes and seize books, pamphlets, or periodicals. The police conducted 124 raids in the first 6 months. They raided homes, newspaper offices, cultural centers, bookstores, and even a school classroom. Journalist Dan Daniels was a leader in the fight against the padlock law.
In the 50s, I wrote a book, The Story of the Padlock Law. The padlock law was not aimed strictly at Reds or communists, was aimed at anybody who thinks a bit to the left, and you didn't have to think much to the left.
Many on the left defended Stalin and the Soviet Union in the 40s and 50s, but would later regret doing so. For the other social reforms they championed back then, Dan Daniels today feels a sense of accomplishment.
The medical insurance was fought for in demonstrations in the streets, for health care. I grew up in Canada. If you didn't have any money to go to a doctor, you could not go. So many of my friends and ours, we lost our teeth as children because we couldn't go to the dentist. We couldn't go to the doctors. We couldn't go buy the medicine. Much of this is all being changed by movements of the left, of left liberals.
As an active communist in the Quebec of the Padlock Law, Daniels found it bitterly ironic that he only felt the sting of the act after he had become disillusioned with the party.
This man yells into the phone, "The police, they're raiding!" And I hear the phone grabbed away from him and banged down. Well, I say to myself, I'm in on it. The police are raiding. I better warn everybody. And I figured they're not going to come because they must be aware that I'm not feeling that comfortable with the Communist Party at this point. After all, within a year, I'm leaving the Communist Party. About a half an hour later, the doorbell rings, and they trudged in. 4 of them at first.
Daniel's home had been raided by the Quebec Provincial Police's infamous Red Squad, headed by the notorious Paul Benoit.
Lieutenant Benoit was about 6'5". I was scared. I'd been in a peace demonstration where I saw him put the blackjack down on the head of a woman who was my namesake, Mrs. Daniels, and just about broke the blackjack on her head. And now he's got me. If I had known there were 2 reporters in the home, I wouldn't have felt so intimidated. But I was scared. I'm ashamed of how scared I was at that time. Because I felt he would break me in 2, and they would give out the report I was resisting arrest, etc.
The Red Squad seized all his books and writings. To the police, everything with a red cover was particularly suspect, even Time magazine. A freelance author, Daniels lost his writings and research. The whole experience was devastating.
When your home is invaded, when strangers come into your space and violate it and violate you, when they bring their mud into your room, when you are at their mercy, it was something of which I have not yet gotten rid of.
The raids finally stopped when the Supreme Court ruled in 1957 that Duplessis had overstepped his authority in enacting this odious law. By 1963, Duplessis had been dead 4 years, and the worst days of the Cold War appeared over for my family. My dad applied once again for citizenship, and this time, according to an RCMP document I received back through access to information, he got a security clearance. In October 1963, he proudly acquired his Canadian citizenship. Although his name was no longer on the Canadian blacklist, it still appeared on the blacklist kept by U.S. authorities. Waiting there for him in 1967, when he was forbidden to board the flight to Israel via New York. How did Dad wind up on the U.S. blacklist? I read that he was in the company of thousands of Canadians, some prominent, like Pierre Trudeau and Farley Mowat. Every year, the RCMP delivered a new set of names to the FBI. The Bureau even had a man in RCMP headquarters. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I found out the United States shared its Cold War intelligence with Canada. But there was a high price to pay, according to historian Reg Whittaker.
The only thing that Canada has really got to offer, for the most part, back in exchange is information, at least as far as the RCMP or the Security Service or CSIS goes, is information on Canadians. And so, in fact, we were providing information on Canadians to the Americans, and that information was being used against Canadians.
The public servants who met in the security panel back in the late 40s thought they were doing the right thing. They wanted to avoid the excesses of our neighbors to the south. Their way was to be the Canadian way, quiet, genteel, unobtrusive. But evil does not come dressed as evil, as playwright Arthur Miller pointed out. The RCMP may not have set out to harass a Jewish tailor in Montreal, a musician in the Toronto Symphony, or a union cultural director in Sudbury. But in the end, the process started by the security panel spun out of control. The RCMP would create 800,000 files on more than 1 million Canadians.